Good afternoon and welcome to the City of Rapid City Legal and Finance Committee meeting for Wednesday, March 2nd, 2016. I'd like to start the meeting with the roll call and determination of quorum, please, Meg.
Brew, here. Laurenti, here. Nordstrom, here. Lewis, yes. And Scott, here. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Now's the time to adopt today's agenda. If there's any committee member that would like to add, subtract, or modify anything on the agenda, I'd like to hear from them now by pushing your light. If not, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the agenda as presented today.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Got a motion by Nordstrom to adopt, second by Drew. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda has been adopted for today. Now is a time for general public comment. This is a time for anyone in the audience to address the seated committee members today on any item that is currently not on today's agenda. I currently have no speaker request forms. Am I missing anyone? Seeing none, we're going to move on to public comment for consent items. Today's consent items are items 1 through 17. I currently have no speaker request forms for any consent items. Am I missing anyone from the audience that would like to address us through public comment on consent items 1 through 17? Seeing none, public comment is now closed on consent items 1 through 17. Chair would like to recognize Alderman Nordstrom. Yes, now is the time to pull any items that any seated committee member would like to address separately. Chair would like to recognize Alderman Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can we pull item number 9, please?
All right. Chair would like to recognize Alderwoman Drew.
Thank you. Item number 8.
Chair would like to recognize Alderman Laurenti.
Thank you, Chair. Item 3 and 4, please.
There are no further lights from seated committee members. I'll entertain a motion to approve the rest of the consent items, which is 1 through 17, except item 3, item 4, item 8, and item 9.
So moved.
Got a motion by Laurenti to approve. Second by Drew. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of approving consent items 1 through 17, except 3, 4, 8, and 9. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 3 is to waive the water fees for the East Madison Street Community Garden. Chair would like to recognize Alderman Laurenti.
Thank you, Chair. And I was hoping that there would be somebody here to answer questions on this. I don't know that I have some very, specific questions, but maybe I can just air them just for the public record. But the questions are, who owns the property? What are the differences between this community garden and the one on Lemon Street? And are we treating them the same? There was one other question, but since nobody's here to answer them.
Yeah, I don't see Mr. Biegler here today.
So I'm hoping at the council meeting this coming Monday night, next Monday night, we will be able to get those questions answered. Since we're talking about, I'd like to know the cost, what we're dealing with there as well. So I'll yield the floor. Thank you.
Chair would like to recognize Alderman Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll move to send this to the council without recommendation.
Got a motion to send item number 3 to council without recommendation. Motion by Nordstrom, second by Laurenti. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 4 is resolution number 2016-024, authorizing the placement of hats, scarves, and other articles of winter clothing on the presidential statues in downtown Rapid City. Chair would like to recognize Alderman Laurenti.
Thank you, Chair. And I wanted to talk about this item. I support, obviously, putting out winter clothing for people who are in need. It's convenient for people to just grab it. I'm just hoping that since we're about ready to wrap up the winter season, I'm hoping that we're going to wrap it up. We're all from South Dakota. We know it could be April or May before that's done. But the really cold weather we're getting out of is what I'm making a point on. But I'm hoping that maybe this next winter season that we could entertain, maybe it's already been entertained, and if somebody has some of that knowledge that they could speak today, that would be great. about some designated areas besides the statues, because what is it that limits? I mean, we could have entire statues covered with scarves and hats and gloves and completely covered. I mean, and we're talking very expensive bronze statues that were put there for a visual reason, so that people could learn the history and do the tour and enjoy that. I don't know how much that's getting done during the very cold winter months, but has it been entertained? Have we talked about posts or poles in strategic locations downtown, or even like meter posts or that type of thing instead of the statues, where people can leave these items for people who really need these things, which I support. So I'm hoping maybe we can have that conversation Monday night as well. Thank you.
Chair would like to recognize Alderman Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I appreciate Alderman Laurenti's concerns. I just don't think it's as big a problem as we're probably thinking it might be. And given the politics, some of the presidents that are hanging on, they're probably the most they've ever helped the homeless anyway. So I think that's, it's just a good thing to do for the community in general. And I think it just, I don't see it hurts anybody. And we got some good press out of the Wall Street Journal from doing it. So I think it's just, I think it's just a good positive thing for the community in general. Thank you.
Chair would like to recognize Alderwoman Drew.
I also support leaving the scarves and hats on the statues. I see people that interact with the statues all the time, and I think it's one of the more, kind of hip things about having the statues downtown in the first place, is that it's always interactive, and I would have never imagined that when I heard about this project. So I really support the scarves and gloves, and I don't think that they'll be overrun by scarves and gloves and hats, so I don't see any reason to change this.
Thank you. Chair would like to recognize Alderman Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll make a motion to adopt the resolution.
I've got a motion to approve by Nordstrom. I've got a second by Lewis. Alderman Nordstrom, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I, too, am a little bit uncomfortable with all the scarves and hats and everything being placed on the statues, but it doesn't reach that level of discomfort. So what I'd like to see is actually better utilization of the scarves and hats and other winter clothing given directly to the people in need rather than placing them on the statues. But I can still go along with this again, with this resolution. But I also wonder if we shouldn't have a sunset clause on it so we could take another look at it in the future. And I don't know what that provision should be, because of if there is that level of overuse or maybe even abuse of the placing of the articles. And again, I'd rather see the articles of clothing given directly to instead of being passed through in this fashion. Thank you. I'll yield the floor.
Chair would like to recognize Alderman Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I appreciate all the concerns. I just don't see a need for a sunset clause. I think our law enforcement's quite capable of, and our code enforcement's quite capable of enforcing it. If should they need the problem really become a problem, then maybe someone will bring it back to us. But let's just, I think it's a good thing for the community. I think it's pretty hip. People seem to really enjoy it. It's not been a problem. I think it's not one of those things, problem looking for a solution, looking for a problem. I don't really see it there. So anyway, I support it 100%. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speaker lights. I do have a motion to approve and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 8 is to approve the fiscal year 2016 Allied Arts funding allocation for community investments, the arts and humanities. Chair would like to recognize Alderwoman Drew.
Move to approve for discussion.
Second.
Got a motion by Drew to approve. I've got a second by Nordstrom. Alderwoman Drew, you still have the floor.
Do we have anyone from the Allied Arts Fund here today? Okay. Just my concern on this, I'll kind of use your model, Alderman Laurenti. I'm concerned a little bit about seeing their full budget. All I've seen is how the funding for the city is used, and it is a conduit for the city funding and the arts subsidy, but I would like to see what they're doing to raise money on top of what we give them. It's not just supposed to be an area where the Allied Arts distributes the money that is given by the city. They're also to be a fundraising organization, and I would like to see what kind of work they're doing towards helping fund arts organizations as there's a lot of the smaller organizations that really need some funding. That's Dakota Choral Union or the barbershop quartet. Some of those, they don't have the wherewithal to go out and raise money. And I understand that, but I'd like to see their full budget. Thank you.
Alderwoman Drew, there may be a potential that the finance officer may have some data to answer your question. Would you like to direct a question to her?
Finance officer, do you have any information, more information? I saw the just what they were doing with the city subsidy today. I didn't see their full budget.
Right, they are not required to give us their full budget. Part of our ordinance is where we give them the money to distribute. They take applications much like we do for the health and human services side of the house, which goes through the community development office now. But because of that, that's why we don't get the whole budget, because that's not something that is part of, I don't believe it's part of the ordinance.
And I get that, but I just think that, we're working so closely with them. I'd like to see what kind of fundraising efforts they're making without the city, and they're a nonprofit organization, so if we ask for that, and I have asked for that, I'd like to be able to see it.
Okay, I can certainly send an email to Gigi.
Thank you.
Chair would like to recognize Alderman Laurenti.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to echo the Alderwoman's not concern, but I think it's important that when we have organizations who want, and I think this has been brought up by me and others throughout the different budget hearings we've had year after year, but when they're coming to the public for the taxpayers' money, if it's not part of the ordinance and we don't require it, we should change that. If they're coming to ask for public money to support their efforts, which I think most of us agree, we want to support those efforts, they need to open up their book so that we understand that either they're at some point going to be independent, and if they're not, that they're making the efforts, I think, that the Alderwoman was pointing to about fundraising to become less dependent on the taxpayers. So if that is not in the ordinance, and I think we need to search that out Monday night, we may need to bring that ordinance up and get that amended to allow us to at least ask for it, and whether it's required up front of all of them or whether it's something we can ask for at some point in the process. So I yield the floor. Thank you.
Seeing no further speaker lights from the seated committee members, I currently do not have a motion on the floor. Oh, I do have a motion. Thank you, Maggie. I do have a motion to approve. And any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
I've got a vote to approve the request for 2016 as approved by the City Council's budget, 4-1, 1 no from Alderwoman Darla Drew. Item number 9 is to acknowledge the fiscal year 2015 annual financial report. Chair would like to recognize Alderman Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may make a motion, is to send this to council without recommendation.
I've got a motion by Nordstrom to send item number 9 to council without recommendation, second by Laurenti. Alderman Nordstrom, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since there's no links to the this item on the agenda, may I ask the finance officer a question?
Yes, you may.
Pauline, is it possible to have the links that will be needed by Monday evening?
Yes, they're sitting on my desk right now for my review. I was out of the office last week when they landed on my desk, so I will look at them yet this week.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And
Yield.
thank you. Sorry about that, Alderman Nordstrom. With that being said, also, Pauline, if you could just clarify, I believe you are required to send City Council something. It's a working document at this stage, but you have to present something based on the fiscal year 2015?
Correct. State statute requires us to give you the financials, the annual financial report by the first meeting in March of every year. In some years, we have received or requested and received an extension. I believe last year was one of those years. This year, I did not feel that it was necessary to do so. However, every time that this comes forward to council, there's typically 3 areas that we have not been able to adjust for yet. One of the major ones is fixed assets, so there won't be any adjustments for fixed assets in the financials that you'll see. The other 2 are accounts payable and accounts receivable, and that's because Our cutoff for our look-back period to see what is a payable or what is a receivable is actually 60 days, which would be February 29th. So that doesn't give us a whole lot of time to get those adjustments made and get the reports all done again for you before the first meeting in March.
And if the council makes a motion to acknowledge the report on Monday night, that doesn't preempt adjustments or revised documents coming back to the city council as those fixed assets and those other things are updated.
Correct. You can request that if you want us to bring back updated ones before we give it to the auditors. Otherwise, you will see them again and have to actually approve the audit itself, usually about in the June timeframe, hopefully this year.
All right. Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, I do have a motion to send to council without recommendation. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. We are now on to the non-consent items. Non-consent items today are items 18 through 22. I do have a speaker request form from Mr. Terry Nelson, but Terry, did you want to talk at this time or do you want to wait till the item?
I want to wait till the item after the discussion. I'd like to make a comment, but not until after discussion on RLA.
Just so you, Mr. Nelson has indicated he wants to wait until this item is brought up, but he's indicated he wants to wait till after discussion. Mr. Nelson, just so you know, we take public comment first unless someone asks a question of you, just so you're aware of that. But the seated committee members up here are aware that you want to say something, so there should be a question if not. Otherwise, I'll call you up first if you've got any questions or comments on it.
Well, I think the city attorney's office should probably comment because they've been working very hard.
Mr. Nelson, I can call you back up when we get to that item, unless you want to address the podium. Okay, so we will wait until we get to that item at this time. Currently, I have no other speaker request forms for public comment of non-consent items. Am I missing anyone from the audience that would like to address the seated committee members during public comment? Seeing none, public comment on non-consent items is now closed, and we are moving on to item number 18. Item number 18 is an item from the public, and Mr. and Mrs. Jeffries are in the audience, and so if I can just ask you to approach the podium, please state your name and your affiliation to the city, and you have the committee's ears.
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Ron, and this is my wife, Kathy Jeffries. We reside at 1732 Mesa Drive. We received a code enforcement letter for a property located at 1804 Fremont Street, which we own. When we received the letter last fall, it appears to be a form letter, and each time the letter is forwarded to the next party that needs code enforcement, they change the name in the top and they change the location of the property. Well, the letter we received said to Ron and Kathy Jeffries at 1732 Mesa, but it was for a property that we did not own. So we did not act on the request to trim the hedge that was indicated in the letter. Beginning of February, about February 9th, we got a notice that someone had been privately contracted by the city to trim the hedge at the property that we did own. So we had been given a notice to trim the neighbor's hedge across the street, but had not been given a notice to trim our own hedge. So we did not act. Subsequently, we received a bill from the city in the amount of $160 for labor, $42 in inspection fees, and then subsequently a late fee of $100 for not paying the initial bill. Our request is to vacate the entire invoice and any fees associated with it, since the notice that we received was not to take any action on our property, it was to take action on the neighbor's property.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries. At this time, if you have no further comment, I'll entertain questions or a motion from the seated committee members. I currently have no light up. Mr. Barbier, if I may ask you a question on this.
Sure.
I did look at the documentation that's attached to this. I guess I saw 1804 Fremont, but was the letter attached? Did it actually have 1804 Fremont, or did it have this other address listed on the letter that's attached?
Yeah, I hadn't heard that before. It would have had it would have been just like it looks now attached to your agenda. We scan them in our database at the time, so if there was a mistake, it would show on the letter. So I'm not sure how that could have happened. When I spoke to Mrs. Jeffries a couple of times on the phone, and she had indicated that they didn't receive a notice, so that's what I was prepared for, I
Well,
guess.
Alderman Nordstrom has the letter that's attached to today's agenda, and it does confirm what I remember seeing, in that the letter attached from your department specifies 1804 Fremont Street.
Yeah, I have a hard copy of that in my packet here, yes.
So, Mr. Jeffries, Mrs. Jeffries, do you have the original letter that shows your name but identifies the incorrect address? Do you have that document?
Unfortunately not. No, I do not. And that, the matter of trimming the hedge, in fact, we did work on that property during the fall, and we did trim hedges inside the sidewalk. And certainly, if there was a need to remove them, the hedges have been there we lived there, we've owned the house for 24 years. The hedges have been there for about 50. In the last 24 years, this is the first notice that we've received saying that they are in a nuisance or blocking the public view of the roadway. And so when we got a notice that said the neighbor's property needed to have a hedge trimmed, I said to my wife, why do we even get this particular notice? So there is definitely some confusion. I don't know if the form letter was the original letter sent out. Is that what you're saying, Jeff? That is or that was a recreation of the letter that was...
No, this is a copy that I made from the letter that was scanned into our database.
Okay, so the chair would like to recognize Alderman Laurenti.
Well, and I looked at this before I came to the meeting yesterday, so I didn't think there was anything that, although I didn't have this from Mr. and Mrs. Jeffries, but the letter I'm looking at to say that is dated December 1st shows that it says the City of Rapid City recently completed an inspection of the property at 1804 Fremont Street. You're contending that you received a letter that did not say that. It said some other street address
Correct.
besides 1804 Fremont. But my understanding is that this is a scan of the letter that was sent. Is that correct, Mr. Barbier?
The letter that was sent December 1st, yes.
And the one that is
a scan of
attached
that.
to the agenda?
Yes.
All right, very good. I have no other questions.
Chair would like to recognize Alderman Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If it's all right with the chair, I would like to make a motion to continue this item for 2 weeks so that staff and the Jeffries can have opportunity to negotiate this.
Alderman Nordstrom, I'd just like to, before the city attorney chimes in here, I know when we've considered these in the past, based on the assessment fees and everything else, staff does not have the authority to negotiate with the property owners. It would take an action from the city council. I believe the city attorney would correct me if I'm wrong in that, but I believe it's going to take some action from the city council to actually say if there's going to be any part of the outstanding fees waived or not. So allowing time for staff, I mean, you can continue to make that motion if you can get a second, but I really don't see how staff is going to be able to do anything.
The reasoning behind my motion is that there seems to be a misunderstanding, confusion, or dispute over the address location, and also some contention about the letter that was also sent out as well. So before I start making a decision on this, and what I would like to see is confirming all of this information that's been presented to us at this time. This letter or this notes that it was handed to us just prior to the meeting, I haven't had a chance to take a look at it very deeply, meaning doing additional research on it. So since there's that element of confusion, that's the rationale for my requesting a continuance.
I do have a motion on the floor from Alderman Nordstrom to continue this in Legal and Finance Committee meeting for 2 weeks. Do I have a second? Second. I do have a second from Alderwoman Drew. Before I go to Alderwoman Drew, I would like to reiterate or re-clarify my question to the city attorney. Joel, I believe that there is still nothing that city staff can do at this point, so continuing this for 2 weeks would just really, the only thing that comes to my mind is allowing the Jeffries to see if they can go back through the documents to produce that original letter.
Yes, I think that would be about it. I mean, we can't waive the fees, and Mr. Barbier has already told you that when they send out the letter, they scan it in, so what he has provided you already is what he has. So unless the Jeffries can produce the letter, which they said they don't have at this point, I wouldn't expect any new information in 2 weeks.
Chair would like to recognize Alderwoman Drew.
Oh, I took my. Okay, thank you. I just have a couple of questions for the Jeffries here. So when you looked at the letter that you got, you honestly thought it was for another property. That's what you feel.
Yeah, and to answer that, the address on the letter, the property that it mentioned, was 3624. And we remembered that number, and after we got our hedge cut, we went back and looked, and it was the neighbor's property. We remember the letter said 3624. It didn't say our address. So how it got scanned in, I mean, it is a huge question mark.
I agree. I think it's really confusing.
We just remembered that it did say 3624.
I know you both to be people of a good reputation in the city. I don't see that you would bring this forward if you didn't think that there was something amiss. So I guess in that regard, I might go with the 2 weeks, but you'd have to come up with something that would convince the council that you guys were misled in their initial communication. Thank you.
Chair would like to recognize Alderman Laurenti.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to ask Mr. Barbier a question, if I can, please.
Yes, you may.
Thank you. Mr. Barbier, is there anything that I think we need a direction to staff to do something specific here, but what I want to know is if that will bear any fruit whatsoever.
Alderman Laurenti, I really can't say where it would, because the information that we have is what is attached. I will say that the only time in the past I have the authority to waive the $42 admin fee, but the council has to make the decision to waive any other part of the invoice. The only thing that I can possibly think of in the Jeffries defense is that we did have a complaint in the neighborhood, so we did trim several hedges in the neighborhood, but this is certainly a copy of the original letter. If there was some kind of a screw up that we sent them the wrong one or something, I don't know about that, but this was the letter that Andy wrote and we scanned into our database.
All right, very good. And then
several properties.
Thank you, Jeff. One more question for the plaintiffs, if you will. Plaintiffs, this is not a court of law.
Jeffries?
How's the defendant, sir? No. Mr. and Mrs. Jeffries, we're continuing this, but obviously we might need, I would suggest maybe that we withdraw the motion, but that's just my opinion. My question to you is, are you able to produce this original letter? Do you have it? Is there any way for you to produce it?
No, I can't think.
I assume it got.
I have searched everywhere.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that we have on it.
So I think continuing it for 2 weeks is futile. We're not going to get any new information, so it's a matter, in my opinion, of whether we deny the appeal or make some motion to adjust the amount or waive the whole amount or just deny the appeal straight up. I'd like to see that happen. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I currently have no other seated committee members. I do have an attorney lined up. So Joel, I'll ask you a question. Is there anything else you wanted to add pertaining to this continuation of 2 weeks?
No, Madam Chair. I had actually put that request in prior to you asking me your question.
Thank you. So currently I do have a motion on the floor to continue in committee to Legal and Finance, the next Legal and Finance Committee meeting at the next meeting. At this time, though, before I take a vote, I will wait to see if there's any other alternate motion or substitute motion to be made. Chair would like to recognize Alderman Laurenti.
Based on the information that we have, and I do respect the Jeffries, obviously, but looking at the evidence that we have and the ability not to get any new information, I'm going to make a motion to deny the appeal.
I currently have a motion to deny. Does it have a second? Motion fails for not having a second. We're back to the original motion, which is to continue in Legal and Finance Committee for 2 weeks.
Madam Chair?
Chair would like to recognize Alderman Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Jeffries, we're close to coming up with a decision, but I would like to have you make an additional comment on what you've heard so far.
Clearly, in our opinion, there was a mess up in what the address read, and what we received. Jeff's got some information that says that that's not what it was. We still believe that there's some difference in how things were sent out, that the notice on our property was not the same. I would be more than happy to pay the original $160 that the city has for labor it cost in the trimming of the hedge, if the council would waive the late fee and the service fee.
Thank you. Thank you. Right now, Mr. Jeffries, I can't make a motion, but I appreciate your consideration for that, and I would be supportive of that motion. Thank you.
Thank you, and just to clarify everything, we're getting ready to take a vote. If this had been denied, it would have went to council with just a recommendation of denial, and the full council will make the actual consideration at this time. Holding it in committee just delays this. So, Chair would like to recognize Alderman Laurenti.
Thank you, Chair. You can tell me if I'm out of order, but I'd like to make a substitute motion to waive the late fee and have the individuals pay the remaining balance of the charge to trim the hedges.
Okay, by waiving the late fee, Alderman Laurenti, it still would be the charge of the service for $160 plus the administration fee of $42.
Correct.
All right, and would you also like to time that out that they need to pay prior to the next late fee amount being attached to?
Absolutely.
I've got a motion by Steve Laurenti to waive the $100 late fee that is currently on the bill. Second by Nordstrom. This is contingent upon the Jeffries paying prior to the next, and I think it's like the 12th or the 15th or something like that. Chair would like to recognize the finance officer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There actually would not be an additional late fee at this point because we've already assessed the one-time late fee. Typically what would happen from here is at some point we would put this on an agenda for setting a public hearing date on it for an assessment roll. We have not gotten to that point yet. So where typically if we had gotten to that point yet, I would tell you not to waive that $100 because we have costs incurred, but we don't really, just a little bit of bookkeeping. So the $100 is fine this time. There is no additional late fee, but I still would like to have a deadline so that way you guys could reconsider if necessary. Not that I'm worried horribly about it, but I don't know what they feel is sufficient, so.
Mr. Laurenti, the finance officer would like a time limit, but she's also indicated we do not need, because there will be no other further late fees attached to this for Jeopardy. So do you want to put a date on it or just simply waive the $100? All right, so the motion, just for clarification, is from Alderman Laurenti to waive the $100 late fee. Second by Nordstrom. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Mr. and Mrs. Jeffries, also, this is still just a recommendation to the full council, so this will be considered Monday night. So if you'd like to reappear and talk to the full council at that time, this is only a recommending body.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 19 is the second reading and recommendation of ordinance number 6092 to update the snow removal procedure in the city of Rapid City by amending chapter 10.48 of the Rapid City Municipal Code.
Move to approve.
Got a motion by Nordstrom to approve, second by Laurenti. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 20 is the second reading and recommendation of ordinance number 6094 regarding the supplemental appropriation number 1 for 2016. Chair would like to recognize Alderman Laurenti.
Thank you, Chair, and I spoke about this at the first reading at Legal and Finance and at the regular council meeting. Again, this is the $67,000 in utility fees that the taxpayers are going to be taking over. Let me just say that the Main Street Square is a great idea. It was a great idea from the beginning. It's still a great idea, and it will always be a great idea. That's not the debate. The debate is not about what it's doing for the community and for the downtown. The debate is about the fact that we had the Main Street Square group here at their first request wanting the utilities paid by the city, and I asked very specific questions. What's changed? Have there been Is there a financial situation with Main Street Square, which is a nonprofit group? Is there something that's changed? Are they having problems with their finances? No, was the reason specifically given. So I still have yet to hear anything except from elected officials saying that this is a park. which in reality it is not a park. It is a vision project, which the taxpayers paid, I believe, about $3.8 million through the vision funds to help build this. Honestly, if we continue down, it's much like the Journey Museum. This at the beginning was promised as, this will not be an additional expense to the taxpayers. This is going to be a great thing, and I agree it's a great thing, but it's become now a liability for the taxpayers, and to the tune of $67,000 every year. It's a lot of money. It's $670,000 in 10 years, and it's over $1.2 million in 20 years. It's a little, people will say it's a little bit, but we're getting hit with the taxpayers are getting hit with a lot of a little bit, a lot. If that makes any sense. It doesn't even sound right. But the reality is the taxpayers are getting hit with increased taxes because of what has recently passed the state, what has recently passed here, when we took the CPI. And the fact of the matter is, we passed the CPI with the fact that we need to make sure that we're covering the increased costs to government to buy all the things they do, paper, salt for the roads, all of these wonderful things that the government needs to be doing, which I agree with. This particular expense, there's no reason for it. The nonprofit group said specifically at this committee, said, no, there's no changes, our finances are solid. And yet we are still going to take this over and make it a liability for the taxpayers without any good reason. So this is more than 25% of the tax increase that we just put on the taxpayers. It's more than 25% of it. We should be ashamed as a council to sit here, pass a property tax increase, and then have this type of wasteful spending when in fact there is no viable reason for changing what we had in place. Main Street Square, which is the group that was paying the utilities, specifically said there was nothing. But somehow council members have come up with something. The groups that were actually paying it said, we're good. So either somebody's not saying something, which obviously is the case, nobody wants to bring it up. And I'm trying to bring them out, but nobody wants to say anything. It's sad. It's very sad. Because it's now a $67,000 annual tax liability that the taxpayers will pay through the general fund. I yield.
Chair would like to recognize Alderwoman Drew.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, Alderman Laurenti and I heard very different things from the Main Street Square. I didn't hear that they didn't need this money. I heard that they did need this money. And with the vision funds, I think we do a disservice to a lot of the groups that we fund by not working in some operational costs for them going down the road. We're only setting ourselves up for these kinds of expenses when we don't include operational budgeting in the places we build, in the buildings, in the facilities, and they need operational funding. Sometimes the people that end up running these places are not the ones that started the ball rolling. So here they are with a place, they want to run it, but there's costs involved in running a public facility. Now, I would say that this is a much better deal than some of our pools because a lot of people that can't afford to take their kids to pools use this service and the fountains for a place to take their kids to cool off in the summertime. Maybe they can't afford, to go to the public pools. So it's used for that as well. I mean, there's just so many great uses for this space. And so, I guess to me, if we're going to pay for the public pools, we should be paying for the water usage down at the Main Street Square as well, because we've all seen the kids down there in the summertime running through those fountains and enjoying the cool water splashing over themselves and giving their parents someplace to rest as well. So I am in favor of going ahead with this supplement, and I think it's an operational cost that we have to start thinking about when we're passing the vision funds.
Chair would like to recognize Alderman Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to make a motion to approve the second reading.
Got a motion to approve by Nordstrom.
Second.
Second by Drew. Alderman Nordstrom, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm finding some of these items for discussion in anti or opposing this supplement illogical and nonsensical. They don't make any sense. The reason I'm saying that is because our parks are open to the public, and this is a park atmosphere that we have, or actually park designation that we have for this Main Street Square just happens to be next to Main Street Square. It is still a park. We do this very similar conditions with other parks within the city. We need to water them as well, and it's free and open to the public. Basically, as Alderwoman Drew suggested, is that the people come down and utilize those fountains. Totally agree. There's massive amounts of people that utilize that. So, and they're taxpayers too, as well. So I find this, a lot of these excuses nonsensical. So I'm going to be, since I made the motion, I'm very strongly supportive of this effort to supplement the budget. Thank you.
I currently have no further speaker or committee members' lights. I do have a motion on the floor to approve second reading. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
I've got an approval for 3-1. Alderman Laurenti, the dissenting vote. Item number 21 is the introduction and first reading of ordinance number 6102, designating the Rapid City Fine Arts Council as the entity responsible for the management and coordination of artistic activities in the area, commonly known as Art Alley, by addition of the section 2.80.060 to the Rapid City Municipal Code. Chair would like to recognize Alderman Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll make the motion to approve.
I have a motion by Nordstrom to approve first reading, second by Alderwoman Drew. Alderman Nordstrom, you still have the floor.
Thank you. From what I've been able to read and get information about this program, I really can support it. It really looks like a good, from what I'm hearing, is that it's something that's achievable and would also help our downtown area. But Mr. Nelson, I know you have some buildings in that area. Could you address any other concerns that I'm not aware of in that respect to that? Yes, please use the podium. Thank you.
Mr. Nelson, if you could state your name and your affiliation to the city once you approach the podium, and thank you for answering any questions by the city seated committee members today.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I'm really excited today. This actually meeting is coming about after about 10 years. You just need to know that. It's 10 years, and there's just been a lot of good things happening and the whole thing. I'm Terry Nelson, boss. Terry Nelson owns 611 Main, and that's where Black Hills State University and South Dakota State University has their clothing store. And it's right across the street from the firehouse for anybody that's not aware of that. I have to start off, first of all, and say I probably attended one of my best meetings of my life here about 3 weeks ago. The Adult Fine Arts Council called a meeting together, Pepper and the group and everything. And there's just been a lot of discussion over the last 10 years on Art Alley. There's no question I've been a big backer of art for a long, long time, but it's been difficult the last 10 years. But for example, 3 weeks ago, we had a meeting at the Adult Fine Arts Center. The mayor was there, the law enforcement was there, the Adult Fine Arts Center was there, the building owners were there, and I really think that it was a huge step forward. I think the city attorney drawing the direction up and stuff, huge deal, and I feel very, very good. I think a lot of people think that, I think probably even some people may even perceive that I didn't like art, the whole thing. It wasn't that at all. I had a renter, I think back 10 years ago, it was one of the first ones that started Art Alley, and actually when it first started, I was very enthusiastic about it. But what had happened over the years, first of all, many of you know that we have historical buildings downtown, and it was a situation where without any permission, without any asking if it's all right to do it, they were painting in historical buildings, and you really shouldn't paint on historical buildings, and I'm sure many of you, people know that. And it just seemed like over the years, if you recall, I think there's been 2 people that have actually died in Art Alley due to violence. And then Art Alley also became, I would say, kind of uncontrollable in terms of the graffiti, the whole thing. And I remember it also became a safety issue where people were on the tops of buildings. They were all over in that. And I think some of us as building owners, we didn't oppose art or anything like that. But I'm just saying to you, it just happened. It was kind of out of control. So anyway, 3 weeks ago, we got together. I think the city attorney and Dull Fine Arts staff should be complimented in terms of what we're trying to do. I'm excited. I really am excited. One of the things, I don't think they should paint directly on the buildings, but I think they could be, for example, either hardboard or it could be a canvas type of thing that they would actually be placed on the buildings by artists that were approved by the Dull Fine Arts Council and go from there. And then I don't know if the painting should be up 3 months, 6 months, or a year, but I think after that, because there's been a lot of good painting down there, but there's also been a lot of graffiti down there. But I could even see where after the painting was, after some time period, and this would be set up by the Dull Fine Arts Center. I don't claim to know when art should come down or go away. But anyway, I think the art itself could actually be sold and it benefited the artist itself. I even visualized a number of things. Of course, the whole thing, I could see where it could be, the paintings could be lit up at night, the whole thing. And for example, I don't know, some of you probably weren't on the city council at the time, but when it first started, the city itself, I believe, put in some more lighting in Art Alley. It was really dark at the beginning, and they put in more lighting. I do believe for safety and everything that we probably should have more lighting. I was talking to Pepper. I visualize a lot of things, but
Mr. Nelson, hold on just a second.
I'm sorry.
Alderman Nordstrom, has he addressed your question?
I'm sorry. You had a question? I'm sorry. I'm following.
You've answered all my questions and then some. So thank you, Terry. If I may move on to another person to address a question, Pepper Massey, please.
And also Lee Geiger's here. He's also a property owner.
Thank you.
Very knowledgeable. Excuse me. Thank you.
You betcha. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Nelson, if you'll stand by, there may be other questions. If you'll please state your name and your affiliation to the city, please.
Pepper Massey, Executive Director, Rapid City Arts Council.
Alderman Nordstrom, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Pepper, if you can go to the area of, we have one objection, one really strong objection to that Art Alley procedure, and I tried to read through his emails and try to understand his concerns, but I haven't been able to really understand where he's coming from on all of this. So if you could help me out, what the opposition really is all about?
I believe Dennis's opposition is to the Rapid City Arts Council, to be perfectly honest.
Thank you.
He's in favor of a permit system. He believes that building owners should be responsible for that. We believe, working with the city and law enforcement, that there has to be a system in place so that everyone is treated the same way, everyone knows where to go. If a building owner isn't in place, where would they go next? If there isn't someone there to speak to, they might paint on a building without permission. So we really want to provide structure.
Thank you, Pepper. I apologize for cutting you off, but that was the gist of my question, is to understand the opposition. And the other factor that I really appreciate is the labeling or putting up signage or the decals, whatever you want to call it, putting it up on, painting on the buildings that says, do not, you got to have a permit, do not paint here, do not use this area. And so I really appreciate that being another major factor in that process that we have in our packet to take a look at. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair would like to recognize Alderman Laurenti.
Thank you, Chair. And I would like to ask a question as well, Pepper, as well, if we can, while we have you there. My question to you is really a matter of being able to make the Rapid City Fine Arts Council the entity responsible for the management. Why did that need the city to be involved? Isn't that something that could have been done privately within the groups that were concerned with Art Alley?
Perhaps. I'm not certain it would have the same significance. And I believe what the building owners are looking for is something that's more substantial. This has been a very inclusive process. There have been concerns and frustrations from building owners. At the end of the day, it's their property, and we're looking to, we heard their frustrations, we're looking to sustain the space, but law enforcement also has challenges with that. Are people painting in there legally? Do property owners have they given permission? Are they vandals? It's very difficult for law enforcement to say when they see someone painting on a building as they're walking or driving by, are they making art or are they breaking the law? And this was a way to try and mitigate the problems, but also keep the space open and sustainable as a creative asset to the community.
So it seems to me the enforcement part of that, though, is really the permitting process, right? I mean, because a painter, if a painter wants to paint in Art Alley, the item they have to get is a permit. Correct. So I would assume this is a permit maybe they would need to have at the work site?
Absolutely, yes.
So if they don't have a permit, it seems to me it would be very easy to distinguish between somebody who's doing it legally, if you will, or not legally. So I just don't understand why the city needs to create an ordinance that does that. Whether that, if you want to hold that. If I can, I'd like to ask the police chief a question while I'm on that train of thought.
Sure.
Thank you, Chair. Chief, does this ordinance help? I mean, does this ordinance help enforcement as far as from a police standpoint?
It does. I can tell you that over the last several years, we have worked with business owners and with the Rhapsody Arts Council in many ways to try to come up with a strategy to reduce the conflict that exists within the alley, because we recognize that the vibrancy that the public art brings to the community has a great benefit. So I just want to say that we at the police department are extremely thankful that there is an entity that is willing to step forward and to take on this challenge, really for no benefit of their own, in that it's not appropriate for us as government to try to regulate what is going on the private property within the alley. But the conflict that we constantly are engaged with over the years is, does somebody have permission or do they not? And we, because of the climate that has developed over time, don't have the ability to distinguish that in a reasonable manner. So therefore, it's not been an enforceable issue. So when people paint on the buildings without permission, we can't enforce it.
Right. So how does this change that? Because there isn't any enforcement here. I don't read anything that gives you enforcement.
I believe some of the documents that are linked from the Rhapsody Arts Council outline the procedure that will occur, and that procedure will give identifier to the artists that they have gone through the process. So when law enforcement receives a report of illegal painting or comes upon it, we'll be able to validate that on the spot and move on.
Right, but what law do we have that allows you to enforce that? This is a private group issuing a private permit. It's not a city permit. So my question to you is about enforcing
It clarifies whether or not they have permission. If you don't have permission to paint on somebody else's property and you do so, that's vandalism.
Right,
that's
so
the law.
that's my point, is that doesn't it ultimately have to come from, the complaint have to come from the property owner?
It does. This is going to be very helpful for us to resolve the situations.
Okay, so that's what I'm saying is this ordinance, honestly, I mean, there isn't any enforcement in this. So it has to we still have to have there's a permit, from a private group, which I love Art Alley. I think it's a great idea. But I'm just wondering why we're getting involved when, in fact, the enforcement of it, and for you, still comes from a complaint from the property owner, which has always been the case. And we're still in that particular boat with this ordinance. So I don't understand how you previously stated this is an improvement, or it helps, but I don't understand how it helps. Because for you, the enforcement comes from a complaint from the property owner.
Okay, so I can tell you that in the many meetings we've had with the Arts Council and many of the business owners, I can assure you that this will be an improvement in our ability to impact proper behavior in the alley. As a government organization, we can't control human behavior, but we have a great influence. And basically, by the council, through ordinance, empowering the Rhapsody Arts Council to have influence on this issue, I think it's going to validate it for our community and will allow any vandalism that occurs to be prosecutable. So therefore, we would be able to take enforcement action.
Okay, thank you, Chief. And I think there's some other questioning that will get asked, because I still have some questions. But
Thank you, Mr. Laurenti. Just if anybody in the audience is wondering, we're trying to adhere to a 5-minute time limit, and Alderman Laurenti's time is up, so I'm going to recognize Alderwoman Drew.
Thank you, Chair. I have some questions for our attorney, Joel Lendine. Do you have any comments on this ordinance and how it's going to be affected?
Yes. Part of the reason we're doing this by ordinance, too, is that the Arts Council and its role within the city is established via ordinance. And there was no current language in the ordinance that it wasn't clear whether or not they had the authority to engage in this endeavor or not. So the thought process was, if they are going to take on this role, which a majority of the business owners and the police department felt was who should have the responsibility for this, then the feeling was we should amend the ordinance so it's very clear that they have this authority to take on this role, because their other missions within the city are already defined via ordinance. So that, in large part, was the reason for the ordinance. It's just my personal perception of what has happened. Quite honestly, I used to be in the category of people that thought this should be really up to the building owners and they should come together and do this. Well, the reality is that hasn't happened, and it's probably unfair to them to put that responsibility on them. They're already allowing people, if they choose to participate in this program, to paint on their buildings and their property. And that's where I think part of the disconnect is also with Dennis Halterman. He wants the building owners to be in control. Well, the building owners don't necessarily want to have this added responsibility of administering this. So the Arts Council is stepping in and saying, we think this is valuable. We will take on the responsibility of administering this. In the ordinance, it just formalizes that and makes clear that they have the authority to do so. And it also is a message to the building owners that the city recognizes the importance, I think, and is willing to take an active role rather than the previous thought, which is this is kind of your problem and you need to deal with it. If Rapid City thinks this is a valuable asset and wants to see it continue, it became clear we needed to do something in order to protect the building and the property owners along the alleys so that we could get this back to what I think it was originally envisioned. Again, how it will help in enforcement. We have other situations, for example, Hanson Larson Memorial Park. They have a standing letter to the police department that says anybody there after 10 o'clock at night is there without our permission and is trespassing. So now that makes it very easy for the police department. Now they don't have to track down somebody from Hanson Larson Memorial Park and confirm whether somebody is a trespasser or not at 11 o'clock at night. This would work in a similar way. The building owners that choose to participate will be identified through the Arts Council. The police will have that information. They will know there is a permit. And when they confront somebody, say at midnight, if they don't have a permit, then it's very clear that they don't have permission and that they can be cited. Or if they are working on a building that is marked as not participating in the program, then again, the police department can cite them. At this point, it's not clear who's participating in Art Alley, who has permission, and at various hours of the day, it's difficult to track down or even figure out who the person. You go look at the property record and it's a corporation. Who do I need to talk to? This will, from the police perspective, you either have a permit or you don't. You're working on a building that you're allowed to work on or you're not. And for them, it becomes very easy, or at least much easier, to determine whether or not somebody should be painting and be able to cite them for vandalism. It also makes it much easier for them to be prosecuted by either my office or the state's attorney's office.
Alderwoman Drew, you still have the floor. About 1 minute.
Okay, I'd just like to ask Pepper a question or two. First of all, I'd just like to thank you for your work and your leadership on this and the working with the businesses. I know it's been something that's been, brewing for a long time. I'm also disappointed that this has to be done because it's such an incredible resource for our city, but it does have to be regulated. So it's a hard line to walk. I think something that you might think about in the future, this is just a recommendation by me, but the performers and the vendors in the alley are probably going to have to be controlled too, and you might want to think as you go forward how that's going to actually affect, because I've seen them get in some arguments over space, so I'm just saying that might be something that will happen in the future. But right now, thank you for your work on this.
Thank you. May I make one comment? Yes? No? Yeah. Very quickly, I wanted to thank Tyler Reed, our community engagement coordinator, and Naomi Even Aberly, our education director, as well as the building owners. This has been a long road. It predates me. It's been fraught with frustration, sometimes even danger. I think we are. It is so important to us to sustain the place, but we also hope that this will bring to light that there are two energies that are happening in the alley at the same time. It's sort of the struggle between good and evil. There are people there that are creating and doing art, and there are vandals, and we're hoping to make the good rise and the bad bits of it. Hopefully law enforcement will be able to identify that quickly. So that's really our hope. We think it is an asset, and we'd like to help. We're here to help.
Thank you, Pepper. All the committee members have spoken. I'd just like to follow up with a couple questions that the committee members have brought to light. Number one, Joel, just to reiterate, you did a good job explaining it, but I'm just going to flatten it right out there. Every property owner down there has to give their permission to participate in this program. If they do not give their permission, then the police department has a clear indication that any marks that go on that building are vandalism.
Correct.
And so each property owner has to allow or file their permission with the Arts Council.
Right. They have to agree to participate.
Okay. And then another question that was being discussed up here while some of the explanation was going on, and I guess I'd like to direct this to Chief Jegaris to start with. Chief, as Pepper just a couple minutes ago indicated, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. There's art and there's vandalism. So how is the perception of what is, if I come pull a permit and I want to do an art figure down an art alley and it's in a graffiti style, as long as I have a permit, I can do graffiti style artwork down there?
That would be up to the Arts Council to make the determination. So they will make that determination. If they allow it, they will have the permit in hand. We are not going to get into the business of determining whether or not artwork is art. If they have permission, they have permission.
And so, Pepper, to address my final question so that I don't abuse my time limit on these questions, to follow up on what Chief Jegaris just said and in preparation for Monday night's meeting, if the Art Council is going to be the one that is going to make the determination of what is art or what will be given a permit, what does that committee look like, or does it reside with a sole person like you? Are you the only one making that decision, or do the property owners have some weigh in on what is going to go on their buildings?
Yes, of course. Ultimately is up to the property owners. Some of the property owners may request to see a design, what it's going to look like. Some property owners may say, I do not want this type of art on. So one of the things that we're trying to accomplish is to develop and deepen relationships between the artists and the building owners. So if a building owner objects to a specific kind of art, then it wouldn't happen. But I believe that graffiti art is different than tagging. So you can have someone with a black scrawl, that's completely different than an artist creating with a can of spray paint. So we would not. Now, we also have rules about profanity, vulgarity of any kind. It's clearly laid out. What will happen is that the procedure will be reviewed every time when someone comes in for a permit. The building owner allows that artist, gives them permission to paint on the building, but then the Arts Council will walk through the process with the artist so that they are clear what the rules are. If they abide by the rules, they can receive another permit if a building owner issues it. If they do not, they wouldn't be issued another permit.
Thank you, Pepper. And so just in my closing comment in preparation for Monday night as well, Mr. Nelson had indicated when he was up at the podium that he had some other ideas like artists painting on placards and everything else. So I just want it very, very clear. The ordinance that is before us still allows painting directly on the buildings at this point. That's what we are passing, just so that the public is aware of that. So I do have a motion on the floor. Maggie, I'm looking. I think I have a motion on the floor to approve. We're going to vote. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. This will go to City Council Monday night. Item number 22 is our last item on today's agenda. It is to authorize the mayor and finance officer to sign a settlement agreement between the City of Rapid City and Lamar Advertising of South Dakota, LLC, and TLC Properties, doing business as Lamar TLC Properties. Chair would like to recognize Alderman Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll make that motion to authorize the mayor and finance officer to sign the settlement agreement.
I've got a motion by Nordstrom to approve, second by Laurenti. Alderman Nordstrom, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's one of these, and this is just my opinion now, just my opinion. It's one of those necessary things we have to do to, maybe we're losing a battle, but I think in the end we're going to win the war. So on this dealing with the issues of the billboards within the city. So be patient with us. We're coming up with some, this is the first step in the process, so be patient with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further lights, I would like to direct a question to the city attorney. Joel, I know that the city council has been privileged to information while this negotiation has been going on. Is there anything that you would like to highlight based on this, what has come and what the committee is sending to council for approval?
No, there's, in my memo, and I apologize, the actual agreement isn't linked yet. I actually have comments back from Lamar's attorney in Minneapolis. I would expect that the actual agreement will be emailed to all of you tomorrow, and we can link it to the council agenda. And just to be clear, we're only working on the release language and nothing substantive. Really, the 4 substantive items are identified in my memo. I would say the $100,000 payment, and this all happened behind the scenes, but the way it's worked out, I've talked to our insurer, and they're going to pay 75% of it, or $75,000, which is 75% of it, and we'll pay $25,000. So that would be our share of the cost of that, and we've identified the funding source. So otherwise, it's pretty much along the lines of things that we previously discussed as far as what Lamar was looking for. And again, the distances, while we're rolling those back a little bit, there's still, if you compare them with the other distance requirements and other laws and ordinance across the state, they're still fairly restrictive. So,
thank you, Joel. So I do have a motion to approve and a second. We're getting prepared to vote. The city attorney did indicate that the agreement is not actually attached, so the approval is based on the city attorney's memo. Based at the city council meeting on Monday night, it can be reviewed at that time with make sure that the agreement matches the city attorney's memo. Unless someone else would like to make a substitute motion to send to council without recommendation. Seeing no lights, I do have a motion to approve. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Move to adjourn.
Got a motion by Nordstrom to adjourn, second by Drew. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.